How much do you know about Mississippi? Would you believe that it is a place where cryptids thrive? Let's set aside all preconceived notions and search the woods of Mississippi together.
So, why am I so interested in this cryptid, this Bigfoot, more or less paranormal topic? Well, it's kind of been with me all of my life. Growing up, I've always had an interest in things that were quite different, and it made me a little on the socially awkward side of things. My mind would always create things that wasn't there, but in the same time, my overactive imagination kept me quite busy. I always was fascinated with the subject of dinosaurs and the things quite like them that used to exist, that I was told that went extinct millions of years ago in the school system, but because I'm a Christian and the church that I grew up in, we understood it was only thousands of years ago, so there was still a possibility of these creatures still walking the earth. And what do you know, if I started hearing things pop up on the TV and people that I trusted that told me that these things might still be around here on a plateau in South America or in Lake Champlain and another place called the Loch Ness Monster that resided in Scotland. So my curiosity was, it was it was going full blast. But it wasn't until I was out of college and started doing my own thing, working second shift in maintenance at a foundry that was close to me, that this thing really started becoming a reality more than just an intriguing thought. It was 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was getting things together in order to work outside because it was a little bit cooler. At the current time, I worked second shift, went in around 1 o'clock that evening and worked until 9, 10 o'clock that night. But it was 9 o'clock that morning, and I was walking out to my shed in order to do the daily task that I was required to do at that time. But whenever I was outside, about halfway between my house and my shed, which was approximately 30 yards from each other at the time, from the wood line behind my shed, I heard something go whoop, whoop. You can kind of imagine that it kind of struck a nerve with me, and I was kind of unprepared to deal with that situation. So I paused and honestly could not do anything. So I thought about what in the world could it be, and then all of a sudden it did it again. Whoop, whoop. Well, by this time, every hair on my neck, on my back, on my head was standing at attention. Chills was just flooding my body, and I had no idea what on earth it could be. I could not comprehend what on earth could be facing me right in the woodline that I could not see, that was actually directing noise at me. And then it was at this time, all this process of thoughts that was just bombarding my head, the thing did it again. Whoop, whoop. I was dumbfounded, and I had to have answers. Well, at the time, I was at maybe 21, 22, and so the first course of action I could possibly think of is go grab a gun and go find out what it was. Well, of course, I didn't have one on me because I was only going to do yard work, so I ran back inside and grabbed a little 9mm pistol that I had that was close to my bed and proceeded to run back outside. I ran, and as soon as I stepped foot on the ground outside of my house, I could hear something just tearing through the woods, just limbs crashing back behind it. It was just an utter chaos. It was almost like an elephant running through the woods, through this thicket, and it was just, I couldn't explain my thought process at the time, except that I had to figure out what it was, and the more noise it made, the more my curiosity drove me to run into that wood line. And so after I jumped the fence that was actually right behind my shed, I began looking around, trying to figure out exactly what was going on. And it was by that time that it had cleared the thicket that it was in, and it topped a hill almost 100 yards away from me, maybe closer to 150 yards. Now, mind you, from where my house is to the behind my shed, I'm going to guesstimate anywhere between 35 to 40 yards. And that's by the time I took it took me to cover that distance. This thing, whatever it was, had already covered 100 and 150 yards easily. And as I looked across, as I saw limbs crashing down where this thing had took off, I could see a brownish fur, like a head. And I was dumbstruck because it looked like a human head. Of course, I've heard of these things before, watching TV and everything, growing up with that, all these cryptid shows about the possibility of things. But at the time, I was dumbstruck of what I was looking at. My mind could not comprehend it. My mind was just racing. My heart was beating out of my chest. And I had a pistol in my hand, looking at something crossing over the hill and then jumping over on the other side and hitting a creek, making a huge splash. I've heard deer hit the creeks. I've heard deer hit water before, hit ponds. This was not a deer. The amount of water that it moved with that splash, it sounded like it would be comparable to a waterfall just crashing down all around it. And I was utterly amazed. I had no idea what was going on. And I just stood there. And I could look up and see where all the limbs that had been knocked down were laying on the ground. I could see fresh broken limbs in a straight path to where that thing topped the hill, to where it was. And these limbs was anywhere between 8 to 10 foot off the ground. I was beside myself about what I actually experienced. Now, at the time, at this time, I wish I would have been more patient. I wish I would have done other things. I wish I wouldn't have got excited like I did and just flew into gun mode, but I did. And that experience has spurred me to find out more about these creatures than ever before. Now, fast forward, I'm around 7 years. Never had experience throughout those 7 years, but then I moved, got remarried, and I moved a trailer into this new location. Well, I was preparing to get some things done around the house, and it was around 8:30, 9 o'clock that night. I was working, trying to get some things out of my truck so I could do some little bit handyman things around the house. And I heard something snapping limbs at me in the wood line. It was roughly about 50, 60 yards away. But every time that I looked down to put these tools together, I can't remember exactly what it was. It was a socket set maybe. I was trying to reorganize or something or other. And every time I looked down, a limb snapped. And you could say that these were old trees, old oak trees and everything that was just breaking because of maybe a wind or something or other. It was around fall time. I believe it was in between October or November. But it was not. Wind can't just say that every time that I look down, wind doesn't just break limbs. You got to understand, this wasn't randomly at all. It was every time I looked down, every time I got back to what I was doing, a limb would break. And this happened about 7 or 8 times. Once, it's random. 2 times could be a coincidence. 3 times, it can be a little bit more of a coincidence. But you go to say 7 to 8 times, that wasn't a coincidence. I finally had the hair stick on the back of my neck, and I was getting scared. I can't explain that. I've been in the woods all my life. I've seen things out in the woods, black panthers from where I live and everything. Even had came almost 5 yards from some coyotes. But this was a different fear. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and I'm going to chalk it up as something unexplainable that is paranormal. And it caused me to get my tail back into the house real quick like. But then, a year later, this was going to happen between December and January. This was only maybe about 4 years ago. I had another experience. I have 2 large white dogs. Both of them are half Great Pyrenees and half Anatolian. They're sheepdogs. Well, here's what happened. It was around 11 o'clock that night. My dogs start going ballistic. They bark at cars going by. They bark at other dogs coming in the yard. But at this time, my dogs were absolutely rabid. They were just fiercely barking like they was going to rip something's head off. And it woke me up. I jumped out of bed, and I saw they was both looking at the wood line, and my male dog was actually walking toward the wood line, just barking, just ready to jump on something. And so I grabbed a gun so I could try to protect him in case it was something wild and bigger than he was. Well, whenever I walked around to the other side, I started walking closer to the wood line, and my dog by this time, he was walking on the road right in front of my house, and the road kind of curves around this woods. And as soon as the dog got to where I could not see him any longer, it sounded like a 22 rifle, 22 long rifle just went off. I just knew somebody was walking down the road and shot my dog. And so I pulled my gun up and started aiming at the wood line, trying to figure out exactly what was going on, but I couldn't see anything. So I kept my finger off the trigger. But then my male dog came back with his tail stuck behind his legs, cowering, just at a little steady jog coming back to me. And it was by this time when he saw me and I saw him, that same exact fear hit me like a ton of bricks. And I honestly could not comprehend what was going on. I knew something had happened to my dog. I knew I heard that sound. I knew I did not hear a bullet hit or anything. My dog wasn't hit by a bullet or anything. My dog was okay. My female dog, she was okay. So I waited for a few minutes. I didn't hear anything. So I walked back inside because honestly, that's all I could feel like I had to do. There was no thought of me staying out there. There was no thought of me going to the wood line. It was as if what I had to do was get back inside. And that's what I did. And I honestly could not explain it. But then the next day, the curiosity hit me again, and I had to go figure out exactly what had happened to my dog and myself. So I walked outside. I went around to the wood line that this happened at. And what I found amazed me. In a young tree, roughly about 4 inches in diameter, the top was broke off of it. It was a new tree. It was alive. How I knew it was alive is because I saw the top of it and the leaves, or the top of it was still green. Most of the leaves had done fell off at that time, and I think it was a mild winter, so all the leaves hadn't dropped yet. But the whole tree, top of the tree was snapped off. And of course, you can never be 100% sure, but I'm willing to place all the money I have in my bank that I heard the top of that tree snap off. And so my curiosity hit me again. So I ran back to the house and I grabbed my tape measure. And I measured from the base of that tree to the top where it was snapped off 15 feet. Did something stand there and snap it off, or did something try to climb the tree and the top just break because of sheer weight? I'm not sure. I have no idea what happened. But those instances have drove me to a point where I listen to podcasts all the time. I look at databases all throughout the United States, throughout the world, and I especially look at the ones concerning my state of Mississippi. And it has drove me to find out more about the things that people claim are not in our woods. I'm under the firm conviction that any of those instances that had happened to me, if whatever that was wanted to, it could have got me. It easily could have grabbed hold of me and just done away with me. But 3 times, 3 things got my attention, got my dog's attention. I believe they was trying to communicate. 2 of them was trying to communicate for me to get my tail back inside. And the other one doing the whoop whoop mess. I don't know. So those are my tales or my experiences that have drove me to this point. So I don't know. The more experiences I have, though, the more I'm going to be able to share with y'all. But if you want to know what has drove me to this point, to be where I'm at today and do this podcast, this is it. Until next time, there's boogers in those woods.